Hi. So this week we are talking about conflict. And conflict is something that people usually have really strong feelings about, but it is something that is really valuable and important to the development of our relationships. It's in some ways required. And how we approach conflict is something that we can make choices about. And so the value of looking at conflict this week is really to determine how you approach conflict and how making some different decisions about how you approach conflict might help you be more successful or better accomplish the goals you have when headed into those conflict situations. So to begin with, let's look at why we study conflict. So first of all, we study conflict to avoid violence, and that's both emotional violence and physical violence. When we understand how conflict works, then we can try to make choices that will allow us to be in better emotional and physical safety. It's also a really confusing thing. Conflict is stressful, both for your mental processes, but also for your feelings. And it can affect us well beyond the time that the interaction occurs. So it's important to understand different ways to talk about conflict and think about conflict so that you can help yourself and help others work through some of those confusing cognitive feelings and emotional feelings. We also need conflict in order to accomplish our interpersonal goals. Sometimes we have to have a conflict in order to get to the place we want to be in a relationship, or to accomplish an instrumental goal we have, or to alter someone's perception of us. Sometimes the conflict is required in order to get those goals accomplished. Conflict affects our physical health. So the conflict causes stress, and stress causes real effects on your physical well-being. So if you are in a situation where you are constantly in conflict, that causes a lot of stress on your body and can affect your heart health, your physical health, and your mental health. The other thing is that conflict is completely natural, and so it will happen. It's an inevitable element of relationships, and so having a better understanding of conflict helps you to be more successful and more comfortable when that conflict does occur. So there's some real benefits of conflict. The first is that it fosters healthy debate. We need to discuss ideas, and we need to engage over things that are causing us problems or things that are causing us concern. Communication is vital to accomplishing progress in almost any relationship or any arena, and oftentimes that spurs debate or spurs conflict, and that's okay, as long as the choices that are being made during the debate and the conflict are productive. The other thing is conflict is really important in order for relationships to grow. Sometimes you have to have a fight with someone to better understand them. Sometimes you have to have a conflict with someone for them to better understand you. So the conflict can really actually help the progress of a relationship as much as it might cause for de-escalation of the relationship as well. But it's an important element of how relationships move and change. Having conflict can also help us improve our decision making, because we might better understand other parties, or we might practice our argumentative skills. And remember that argumentative skills are your ability to build arguments or build support for your opinions. It's not necessarily being aggressive. And so being argumentative is something that can help you make decisions, help you improve your decision making for yourself when other parties aren't involved at all. Because sometimes being able to build those arguments is what allows you to make a choice. And then finally, conflicts help us save time. You know, if there's a fundamental conflict over something and you know that, then it doesn't cause for drawn out experiences where suddenly something jumps out of nowhere and you're like, oh, I didn't agree with that, or I didn't know that. So allowing for conflict to occur naturally and productively in relationships helps you save time in terms of communicating yourself, and also save time in terms of understanding what the longevity or trajectory of the relationship might be. So conflict is defined as an expressed struggle between at least two interdependent parties who perceive incompatible goals, scarce resources, and interference from others in achieving goals. And these items down here, scarce resources and interference from others in achieving goals, these are all tied up in perceiving incompatible goals. So we're going to take a look at the three highlighted parts of this definition because they really are the key components of what a conflict is. So the first is an expressed struggle. Conflict requires some kind of explicit expression. You can't go along with everything being normal or standard or the way that it is all the time and have a conflict. Conflict requires that somebody in some way changes their behavior or their communication in order to express their struggle. So you can have internal conflicts, and this is called an intrapsychic conflict because it's happening inside your brain. And in internal conflict, there's no external expression. It's purely inside of yourself. And it might be that you're having an internal conflict about another person or about a relationship, but you don't express that conflict externally. The next is interdependence. And so we know that our interpersonal goals are achieved through interaction. So since conflict is tied up in our ability to accomplish these goals, conflict is also interdependent. And in order for us to have a conflict, our behavior must be coordinated with the person or party that we have a conflict with. My sister and I used to fight a lot when we were kids, and I knew that she couldn't really fight with me if I wouldn't also engage in the fight, which drove her crazy. But it was me avoiding the conflict by refusing to engage in that interdependence. She couldn't have a fight with me if I didn't fight back. And that's because conflict has to have an interdependent quality. Both parties have to be engaged and engaged in a timely manner where they're going back and forth together. The other thing is that during conflict, your personal goals start to feel blocked. And so we need other parties to accomplish our goals. We need other people to look at us and reflect their perception of us for us to have a sense of who we are. We need other parties to have relationships with, and we need other parties in order to accomplish instrumental goals. So during conflict, that requirement of others starts to feel missing, right? We feel like we don't have their engagement or their help. And so those goals start to feel blocked, and our interdependence in that case starts to feel blocked. And that's a lot of what causes our frustration. The other element here is that a lot of times conflict is over goals that we see as being incompatible, but in fact, they might actually be compatible, but the way that our perceptions are shaping how we're looking at the issue make them appear incompatible. So for example, I used to get in a lot of arguments with my husband because he would spend all Saturday. We had just one day off together that we both had. It was Saturday. And he would take that Saturday to go rock climbing or skiing with a friend. And I would get so upset because I wanted to spend the day with him. And he would get upset with me because he wanted to have time to himself, right? To do the things that he liked to do. And what we discovered is that he was setting aside Friday, which was his other day off, to do the things around the house that he knew I wanted him to do. Chores, dishes, things like that. And then he would take Saturday to go skiing and do his fun stuff. And we realized that if we just agreed that we would do our chores and stuff like that together on Saturday, then he could take Friday to go skiing, and I would be happy that he was home. So the goals were actually not that incompatible, but the way that we were thinking about them made them seem insurmountable. So once we were able to recognize that our perceptions of time and what needed to be done when were what was affecting the situation and causing the conflict, we were able to work through it because we recognized, oh, there's a clear solution here. So oftentimes the goals are not in fact incompatible, but they feel that way based on the parties' perceptions. And that's partly because goals are very complex. You know, we have a lot of them. They interact with each other, and they're not necessarily something that's easy to write down or point to. A lot of times coming up with what goals we have and how they're maybe being influenced by other people takes a lot of thought and a lot of reflection, and that can be really challenging, especially when you are at a heightened emotional state due to conflict. Also, we have a lot of different goals, and those goals are often interacting with each other, and that affects how we present the goals to other people, how we pursue them in conflict, and also it affects the perceptions that we're holding of our own goals and of the other person's goals. And finally, your goals change over the course of a conflict. So have you ever had a fight where you start fighting about one thing, and then at the end you're arguing or talking about something completely different? That's because conflict often causes us to reflect on larger goals or this multiplicity of goals. And so over the course of the interaction, even, the goals change. And that can make it really hard to understand what the other person is trying to accomplish. So each of us approaches conflict with a different style. And these styles are based off of two elements. The first is titled Your Concern for Others, and the other is Your Concern for Self. Now, really, you should think about this as your concern for others' goals and your concern for your own goals. So there are 5 different conflict styles. The first is competing, and someone who is competing has very high concern for their own goals, but low concern for the other person's goals. So they really, really, really want to accomplish their own goals, and they don't really care whether the other party accomplishes theirs. The second is withdrawing or avoiding, and someone who's withdrawing or avoiding does not care whether they accomplish their own goals, and they don't care whether the other party accomplishes their goals either. The next is accommodating, and someone who is accommodating cares a lot that the other person accomplish their goals, but is not concerned with accomplishing their own goals. Someone who is collaborating is concerned with both parties accomplishing their goals. They want to make sure they accomplish their goals, and they want to make sure that the other party accomplishes their goals as well. And then finally, someone who is compromising has very moderate concern for both parties accomplishing their goals. So these conflict styles are something that each of us has a predominant style that we'll use the majority of the time, but we also can change. So we can, depending on the relationship and the context and the situation, even if we are typically accommodating, we might choose in a particular situation to be compromising, or we might choose in a particular situation to be withdrawing or avoiding, or we might choose in a particular situation to be collaborating. So you can actively change your conflict style based on your choices, but there is usually one that you are most comfortable with and that you will use the majority of the time. And none of these styles are considered better than the others. They are just styles that people have, and there are benefits and drawbacks to each of them. So the first, in terms of competing, in competing, the advantages are that you will accomplish your instrumental goals. That will happen because you're fighting for them. It allows for very rapid decision making because you know that your goals are important to you and you're going to make sure that they occur. And the disadvantages are that it can really hurt relational and self-presentation goals. People who are competing are seen to be very hot-headed or aggressive. And so that affects their relationships and how people look at them. And it also can lead to very quick conflict escalation. Someone who's competing to accomplish their own goals can really quickly put the other party on the defensive, and that escalates a conflict very quickly. And because of this, others may avoid you in conflict because they aren't as comfortable competing for their goals, so they don't feel comfortable engaging with you in that competitive style. The next type is the almost exact opposite, and this is withdrawing and avoiding. And this is someone who will avoid conflict at all costs. So the really good things about this is that people who use this style tend to be able to let things go, let their goals go, because they don't have the interest in fighting for them, and that can be really good. It protects people from harm. If you aren't willing to engage in a conflict, then you can't be harmed physically or emotionally. And it's very appropriate for short-term relationships. If the person checking you out at the Starbucks ticks you off, avoiding that conflict is valuable because there's no reason to escalate something like that. So it's very appropriate for these sort of many short-term, surface-level engagements that we have on a regular basis. The disadvantages are that someone who uses the avoiding or withdrawing style is often seen to be weak or uncaring. It's seen to be like they don't care in the issue or they have disinterest, when really it's just their way of dealing with it. You also end up abandoning goals, right? You can let some goals go, but sometimes you have to abandon them because you're not willing to fight for them. And maybe it's something that you should fight for. The other problem is that this style reinforces the idea that conflict is unnatural or damaging. And so if this is the only style that is modeled for someone as they grow up, they might have the idea that conflict is unnatural and damaging and find conflict exceptionally stressful later when they are presented with it. So it's important to remember that while this style is just one of the styles that people use when they approach conflict, it doesn't necessarily mean that conflict is unnatural. It's just a way that people choose to deal with it. The next type is collaborating. And collaborating is where you work to make sure your goals are accomplished and the other party's goals are accomplished. And so, of course, a big advantage of that is that both parties are satisfied, usually, because both parties are getting their goals accomplished. It tends to put people in the position of thinking more creatively. If both parties need to accomplish all their goals, that means that both parties have to think about what possible solutions might exist that would suit everyone involved. It shows a really high commitment. It takes a lot of time to think through those solutions and work through all the possibilities. And so if someone's using a collaborating style, they're very committed to the situation and to the relationship. So this is very good for long-term relationships because you don't want to be in a situation in a long-term relationship where somebody resents you for one thing or the other. So when you're collaborating, you can be sure that both parties are accomplishing the goals that they have. And given this, it enhances our instrumental goals and relational goals. It's seen as very, very competent because no one ends up being disappointed. The disadvantages are that it requires a lot of energy and time. It takes so much time, thought, reflection, discussion to make sure that the solutions or actions that are coming out of a conflict meet everyone's needs. So that can be very exhausting. And in some relationships, you don't want to take that much time or energy because it's just not worth it. The other problem is that it can be faked. People can pretend to be content with outcomes or pretend to be doing things that will suit both parties when really perhaps they are not. So the last disadvantage here is that it is incredibly frustrating if not reciprocated. Because if somebody is using a collaborating style and wanting to make sure that everyone's goals are being accomplished, but the person they're engaging with is using a competitive style and doesn't care whether the collaborating partner's goals are accomplished, it's very, very frustrating because it's much more difficult to accomplish all of those goals if not everyone is working towards them. The second to last type is accommodating. And accommodating is where you put all your energy into accomplishing the other person's goals. So the advantages of this is that the person seems very reasonable, right? Because when they're engaging in a conflict with someone, they are completely focused on making sure the other person is happy. It also avoids harm to self, right? If you're not fighting for any of your own goals, then you can't have any problems with the other person being upset about your goals, so you avoid harm. And it tends to improve relationships, especially relationships with power. So if you are accommodating of a boss or a teacher or a parent, that's really nice, right? They like not having conflict with you. And so even though there might be cases where you should engage in a conflict with them, you don't, and that makes for a very smooth relationship when there's power at play. The disadvantage is that that when you use this style, you communicate a lack of power. And that means that you communicate a lack of investment in self. And so you appear to be someone that serves others rather than serving yourself. And that can be a bad thing, right? Because it could lead to you being taken advantage of in some way. It causes you to ignore your personal goals. So you might put all your goals on the back burner for somebody else. And that could keep you from accomplishing things that you want to accomplish in your life, or keep you from changing or escalating a relationship in a way that you'd like to. And it causes you to sacrifice those goals at some point too, because it's no longer possible for you to accomplish them because you've been accommodating the goals of another party for so long. So the final type is compromising, and compromising is moderate concern for self and moderate concern for others. And what that means is this is the style where you use a quid pro quo kind of game. Okay, I'll give up this goal if you give up that goal. All right, if I help you accomplish this goal, you'll help me accomplish this goal. So it's very much a trade. And that means that both parties have to give something up. And that's why it's considered moderate concern for self and for others. So the advantages are that both parties do accomplish some of their goals, and that can be very satisfying. It's very efficient, it's very fair, it's very clear. It seems very reasonable for those reasons. And it maintains your relational goals because both parties tend to be content with the outcomes. The disadvantages is that although it's easy and clear, it can be counterproductive because people are giving up goals. It could be that the goals that are given up are actually very important and should still be pursued or accomplished. It requires sacrifice from both parties, which can breed resentment. And it limits your creativity because instead of looking at the situation and saying, how can we accomplish all of these goals, you're looking at the situation and saying, okay, which can we trade, which can we give up? When there might be a solution that would allow for all the goals to be accomplished. So that is the basic overview in terms of conflict. It's important to keep in mind that you have choices when it comes to conflict. So you can make choices about where you move on this spectrum, right? No matter what your major conflict style is, depending on the situation, the person, and the interaction, you can make a choice to use a different style. So keep that in mind when you find yourself in conflict situations in the future. And also keep in mind that there are cultural influences when it comes to conflict. If you're someone who's from a high context culture, right, that's going to affect the way that you engage in conflict versus someone who comes from a low context culture. So just remember that conflict is something that's natural. It's something you can make choices about. And it's something that we have a lot of influences, cultural influences on, not the least of which is our perceptions of others and how those conflict styles reflect on them. So I hope this gives you something new to think about in terms of conflict. And as always, please let me know if you have any questions. Thanks.